Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Pollock, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago reporting. Welcome to another edition of the Goldwater Report. Thanks again for tuning into the Critical Post Chicago again, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate it. Now, if you live in the Chicago area, you can also see our reports at various times being aired on Chicago Cable Access Network, or as it's known in Chicago as CAN TV. Also, we've just uploaded another podcast of the Bittersweet Records Radio Hour, which we think you will find very entertaining, which can be viewed every week starting most of the times Thursday mornings at bittersweetrecords.net or the head page of the Critical Post. It can also be heard on the East Coast at midnight at AnnaMarieIslandRadio.com or in the Midwest at midnight at our other platform under Worldwide TMA, known as nightwaveradio.net, Friday and Saturday at midnights. Now, we've been getting a slow trickle of new subscribers, and we'd like to thank them for tuning in to our YouTube broadcast channel. And we'd like to tell you that if you appreciate the job we're doing, please tell someone who you think might benefit from these broadcasts to tune us in. Word of mouth is how this channel will reach new people until such time that we start to pay for promotions or PR work. Something interesting we'd like to report to you also, ladies and gentlemen. The FBI Director James B. Comey has just linked and used the Critical Post Chicago's page, which keeps track of all the president's speeches along with all the other world leaders, to his Zoom info professional profile. Apparently, our brand is receiving the gravitas as an unbiased and legitimate press organization, which we'd hoped to achieve, and it's starting to take hold in a very real and substantial way, as slow as that recognition seemingly may be. Ladies and gentlemen, since our last broadcast a couple of weeks ago, wherein we told you about how a woman's family in Richmond, Indiana, one Ms. Carol Keene and her daughter and her son, and how they were being victimized for detecting and reporting court fraud as noticed by Ms. Keene, we'd like to report to you that her grandson, who had been in jail for 150 days as part of that victimization, has been released, and all charges against the young man have been dropped as a result of our report, and we're glad to see that that occurred. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to see the narratives we have identified as being in constant revolve, to include the constant and incessant reporting of bloodbaths, whether domestic or abroad, reverberating throughout all of the media, we have them listed in an article, and it will be listed shortly at the head page of the Critical Post. All in all, there's darn near 60 different subject matters which appear as regular guests in the yellow journalism propaganda press from the major media corporate conglomerates and the fear pornography alternative press. In other news, the Chinese yuan has been given the nod by the IMF as being considered for special drawing rights as a reserve currency alongside of the dollar, British pound, Japanese yen, and the euro, and is scheduled to be in full effect by next September. Being a reserve currency won't have too much effect until the Western community begins to trust the Chinese, which is not likely to occur too soon. And had it not been for American-founded transnationals installing most of their manufacturing operations on the Chinese mainland for the last 25 years, China would hardly be a blip on anybody's radar. And everyone in the financial world knows it. Also, the idea that the Chinese renminbi, or yuan, being backed by gold is a canard. And the reason that that's so is that it won't matter, because at any time the private banking cartel in lockstep partnership on the Chinese mainland, the People's Bank of China, along with its communist government, will print currency anytime they feel it's necessary, and they're practicing the same thing that is being practiced in the West, which is continually burdening the Chinese population with debt. Now, we've done a loose calculation, speaking of debt, of the effective aggregate tax rate here in America. And when factoring all taxes combined, especially for people who own homes, the effective tax rate is approximately 50% of your income. In our opinion, it's oppressive and contributes to an anti-growth agenda. Why this agenda exists in the halls of our Congress, whom has been managing America's economy for far too long, is anybody's guess, but we attribute it to runaway socialism, which eventually must fall from its own weight. If you factor in, like they do across the pond in Britain, your health insurance premiums as a tax, and so noted by Chief Justice John Roberts in his opinion, wherein the Affordable Care Act was installed as a legitimate process in America, then the aggregate effective rate here in America, especially for people earning $100,000 a year or less, is about 65%. That's an awful lot of darn money, ladies and gentlemen, and you should be paying more attention to what's coming out of your pockets. The yellow journalism propaganda press, both major media corporate conglomerate and the fear pornography alternative media, have been droning away about the terrorism narrative because of the recent events in Paris and now San Bernardino, California. And here in Chicago, they've been droning away about police department murders or alleged murders, abuse, and systemic corruption. As of 2 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin has hinted that, one, a tactical nuclear weapons use as an option upon the terrorists operating in the Middle East is a possibility, and he's recently told Turkey's president that as a result of Turkey downing a Russian jet fighter over the past couple of weeks, Russia may not, in fact, build the planned Gazprom pipeline from the eastern shores of the Persian Gulf, originating from the outside of Tehran into Turkey, which gives more credence to our report here at the Critical Post. That's what's really going on in the Middle East, is a corporate war being fought in the back channels of banking and the fight for natural resources between Eastern fascist transnational interests and Western fascist transnational interests, while having the convenience of a bunch of mad nuts running around thinking that they're going to install some kind of Islamic caliphate. And all of that is merely how much prominence this is taking as a result of extremist Muslim clerical child abuse that started occurring 30 and 40 years ago. Now, in light of all of this and other things, we'd like to provide you this further report and opinion. Last week, Ted Koppel, the much vaunted anchorman of ABC's Nightline, came onto the airwaves of Coast to Coast AM to discuss his new book, which obviously he needs to sell more of, something called Lights Out, which describes the possibility that a cyber attack upon America's electricity grid cannot be defended, according to his research. George Norrie genuflected during the interview at the perceived dais that Mr. Koppel allegedly stands upon as some kind of iconic figure in the news business. Mr. Koppel now works as a managing editor for the Discovery Channel. In his familiar booming voice, he condescended at the Coast audience to be afraid for their very lives about a possible electrical grid failure from cyber attack. Somewhere in other media, it is alleged and being reported that when Mr. Koppel had been asked by others if he'd talked with anyone in the cybersecurity business about his findings, his reply was no, he had not. We have not been able to corroborate that either as being legitimate or not, but it is an interesting rumor. Now think about this for a second. Coast to Coast, owned and produced by a major media corporate conglomerate known as Premier Networks. And as far as we're concerned, an official channel of taint being used by clandestine elements within America's espionage infrastructure, proven to you by us during our investigation of the sordid affair surrounding the platforming of David Wilcock's shilling of a nefarious international fraud and criminal known as Neil Keenan. Koppel's press agent gets him booked on Norrie's show. Now, why would that be? It's not like Norrie's audience needed to hear this fear-mongering from yet another mongerer. Preppers have been prepping for a collapse for quite some time now. It's a very lucrative industry of a few $billion and has been growing steadily for a long time. What need does the Coast to Coast AM audience have for Koppel's book? Now, Ted Koppel, though having a great broadcast voice, is no more a great press man than the local college neophyte. Where was Ted Koppel all these years, letting the question of who killed JFK to linger on the dustbin of history? ABC made him famous. He's never lived up to the advertisement. In other news, a few days ago, the fading rag, otherwise known as the New York Times, has unloaded a hit piece on their political editorial section about Donald Trump, citing that they think Mr. Trump is a demagogue. One of the contributing authors to the piece was one Ms. Maggie Haberman, who had been a former left-wing political operative writing for the left-wing political rag known as Politico. Think of that. The New York Times is citing Don Trump for demagoguery. Talk about the kettle calling the pot black. Better yet, think about Haberman herself doing that. It's a bit ironic, in our opinion. Also, it has been reported just recently that the RNC is considering the idea of brokering their nomination convention, which means that's exactly what will happen if Don Trump sweeps the election tables across the nation, which we think is a distinct possibility if we're to believe polling data and take any of it as scientifically sound. There's reason enough to doubt that it is sound, but it's clear the GOP establishment and the Democratic Party establishment are increasingly getting very nervous. What it goes to show you is that the perception that America has a legit election process has just been exposed, though unintended by these highly monetized interests of political parties, as a complete fabrication and shown to be exactly what it is, a fraud owned and controlled by the highly monetized interests in America's private enterprise structure, publicly traded on the stock exchange along with the think tanks in Washington, D.C., who are following the system devised by the Rand Corporation, one of the federal government's largest subcontractors, called the Delphi method, or as it should be known correctly as opinion consensus linguistics technology, which is rampant on the airwaves of the Western yellow journalism propaganda press. The conservative firebrand, Mark Levin, is banging away every night on the airwaves about bringing together an Article 5 convention, but his storms and vocalizations are sounding more desperate, and our analysis about that points to the ominous fact that despite his national appeal on AM radio, he and those around him are becoming alarmed that for the most part the American electorate is not engaging that process, certainly not as quickly as they would like it to occur. So too, neither will the electorate, at our suggestion from this much lesser known platform, the Critical Post, install the vote of no confidence by changing the apparatus of 50 state separate boards of elections being controlled by the obvious gaming of the two major party corporations' apparatchiks. What all this means, ladies and gentlemen, folks across the country may have given up on the vote altogether as a means to keep, as originally formed, a constitutional republic and government to respond to the people's needs. It is exactly correct, ladies and gentlemen, as reported exclusively by this company as the lone voice in the wilderness, that in fact we are not governed by the Constitution, but the United States Code and Uniform Commercial Code, which only whispers it's paying attention to our common law document, but it will be ignored by lawmakers everywhere, including the courts and the cadre of legal professionals in this country, as they see fit. What is going on in America, ladies and gentlemen, which no one in the quote-unquote and equally uninformed yellow journalism propaganda socialist press as well as the fear pornography alternative media, is accurately reporting is that what we have resembles much more closely a parliamentary system as that of Great Britain, and for that matter, all the rest of the Western civilized world. In other words, none of it is constitutional. So, although it may be legal, and it is, and although you may not like it, oppressive taxation will continue unabated, and your rights are something which more resemble privileges that can be given or taken away at the behest of the controllers we have installed by either the vote or increasingly a lack of participation in the voting process, and they can do it whenever they want. The incremental march towards government-granted privileges rather than God-given rights continues its march toward total totalitarian completion. Ladies and gentlemen, what is in place as a guiding legal fact in this country is that silence equals consent, which turns common law principles on its head and upside down. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, you may not like being forced to be socialists, but rather it is exactly what's happened and will continue for the foreseeable future and for generations to come. Turning back to Mr. Trump's position in the GOP field, a couple of nights ago on an interview of Mr. Trump, which took place on Fox News program The O'Reilly Factor, hosted by the obnoxious and obvious shill for the GOP establishment, Bill O'Reilly. O'Reilly tries to slap Mr. Trump down as not being a serious candidate for the Republican nomination. In our view, equally apparent, alongside of the RNC's hint it will broker their convention next year, that anybody watching this sordid programming is being told that their vote doesn't matter. It's nakedly out there for everyone to see. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no question, in the opinion of this news desk, the Republic, as we understood it, has already been long ago lost, and any vestiges of constitutional Republican governance will be swept aside. All of this, as reported by us, has a direct relation to what kind of money the public is being forced to use as legal tender. Also, as reported by us and our past interviewees and contributors, Mr. Harmon L. Taylor and Mr. Bill Still, the choice of money is exactly at the heart and the matter of our problems and discomfiture. It may be legal, but it is not in the public interest any longer to use this system of exchange, and what should be occurring is that the good folks in America should begin to pressure Washington, D.C. for sovereign money printing and not the debt-infused money of the private banking cartel known as the Federal Reserve System. The debt money we use by the Federal Reserve System dictates a gotcha contractual agreement which opts everybody into the United States Code and the Uniform Commercial Code as the choice of contract between us, the government, and their collection agent, the IRS, and it's politically becoming untenable as well as commercially untenable. Actually, it's not a political problem, it's a commercial problem that most people in this country, if not all, to include everybody in the press, still doesn't understand. Ladies and gentlemen, money is specifically a means of convenient, direct barter. What it is not is a storage of value, but until the gold bugs let loose of that argument, sovereign money printing will not occur. If honest weights and measures are never ever to be restored, as Mr. Harmon L. Taylor would suggest, the people are going to have to rely upon their own means rather than any government, including our own, to opt out of the debt money system by using 90% silver coinage between themselves as a complementary currency, as Mr. Still would call it. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no press organization in this country that is accurately or precisely describing our particular discomfort. And the most important part of the problem we face is the use of money. And the choice of that money dictates the choice of law that you're legally bound by. There is no company except us saying it. And we look forward to your commentaries at our YouTube broadcast comments feed. We'll have more coming up about Mr. Trump and other things. Again, this is Scott Pollock, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago, reporting. Thanks again for watching this edition of the Goldwater Report. That is all.